Bullying neighbor cut down my trees, so I legally made his house unsellable. I came home to a nightmare. My two beloved oak trees lay in pieces across my yard. My bully of a neighbor, let's call him Ron, had trespassed onto my property and cut down my trees without permission. He'd been complaining for months that my oaks dropped leaves on his lawn and blocked his precious view, but I never thought he'd actually sneak over with a chainsaw. I was furious and heartbroken. Those trees were decades old, planted by my late dad. They were healthy, beautiful, and well within my property line. Seeing them brutally felled felt like a personal attack, and I knew right then that I'd make Ron regret it. I immediately called the police to report the destruction. An officer came out and took my statement while I showed him the stump locations clearly inside my survey markers. The cop shook his head in disbelief. Ron hadn't even tried to hide it. The stumps were fresh, sawdust everywhere, and Ron's tire tracks led from his yard to mine. Unfortunately, the officer said this was likely a civil matter of property damage, not something they'd cuff Ron for on the spot. Still, I insisted on filing a formal report for trespassing and vandalism. In my state, intentionally cutting down someone's trees is illegal and can even be criminal, but I knew civil court would be my best weapon. When I confronted Ron from a safe distance across the property line, he was unapologetic and smug. He actually smirked and said, "Those trees were a nuisance. You should be thanking me for doing you a favor." I lost it, yelling that he had no right and I'd see him in court. He just shrugged and said, "Go ahead, try it. Not like anyone's going to put old trees back." The sheer audacity made my blood boil. This guy had been a thorn in my side ever since he moved in 2 years ago. Loud parties, dumping trash on my curb, and even once spraying weed killer that drifted onto my rose bushes. He denied it, of course. He's the kind of bully neighbor who tries to intimidate everyone on the block. Cutting my trees was the last straw. I was done being the nice, quiet neighbor. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept looking out at the ruined stumps, remembering how those oaks shaded my house and attracted songbirds. I resolved to fight back hard, but legally. So I began researching tree laws and property rights. It turns out many states take this very seriously. If someone asterisk willfully destroys a tree on your property, they can be liable for hefty damages, sometimes double or triple the tree's value. I found one law, still on the books since colonial times, that allows triple damages for malicious tree cutting. Basically, the jerk with the chainsaw owes the tree owner 3 times the assessed value of the trees. The next day, I hired a certified arborist to appraise the damage. He confirmed my oaks were about 50 years old, healthy, and each worth at least $8,000 in terms of replacement cost. Large mature trees have significant value. My jaw dropped at the estimate, but it made sense. These weren't scraggly saplings. They were mature oaks that added privacy and curb appeal. The arborist even noted the loss in property value and aesthetic damage to my yard. I felt validated that this wasn't just some leaves, as Ron said. It was real damage. Armed with the arborist's report, I contacted a real estate attorney who had experience with property disputes. He nearly laughed with glee when I described what happened. "He cut your trees down? On your land?" "Oh boy, that's a big no-no," the lawyer said. We discussed my options. I could sue Ron for the value of the trees, the loss of my property value, and even additional punitive damages because it was willful. In my state, there's a specific provision for timber trespass that indeed allows me to claim triple damages if I prove it was deliberate. And given the circumstances, it was clearly deliberate. He couldn't argue it was an accident or misunderstanding of the property line. Before formally suing, my lawyer suggested I give Ron one chance to settle privately. So I approached Ron civilly with a witness and said, "Look, you destroyed my property. You owe me for those trees." I presented him with the arborist's report and the estimated replacement cost, about $16,000 for both trees, which shocked him. Ron went ballistic. He refused to pay a dime, claiming the trees were barely on your side. Utter lie. They were squarely in the middle of my yard. He then switched tactics and bragged, "You can't bleed money from a stone. Go ahead, sue me, you'll spend more on lawyers." He also taunted, "I know the HOA board president and the city inspector. Nothing's going to happen to me." That comment about the HOA and inspector gave me an idea. If he wanted to play that game, I'd involve every authority I could. First, I reported the incident to our HOA. We do have a homeowners association with strict rules about landscaping and property alterations. While I'm not usually a fan of involving the HOA, in this case I suspected Ron hadn't gotten any approval to remove the trees. which he would need if he absurdly claimed they were his. Sure enough, the HOA board was very interested. Cutting down trees without approval is a violation of our community guidelines. In fact, another neighbor told me that Ron had bragged about removing eyesore trees at the last HOA meeting, and the board told him he couldn't remove anything outside his property line. So the HOA was already aware of his intentions and had warned him. He did it anyway. Now the HOA issued Ron a fine for violating landscaping rules and ordered him to replace the trees. But of course, Ron being Ron, he ignored their letter and refused to pay the fine. Typical. No matter, the HOA's fine was pennies compared to what I was going for. Next, I contacted the city's urban forestry department. In our city, there's an ordinance against removing large trees without a permit, even on your own property, especially old-growth oaks. And guess what? Ron didn't have any permits. The city was already mad at Ron because apparently he'd been cited last year for illegally pruning a street tree. When they heard he took down my oaks, the city inspector came out immediately. He assessed the situation, measured the stump diameters to verify these were protected-sized trees, and took my statement. The inspector then paid Ron a visit. I watched from my window as Ron tried to argue with him and waved his arms in angry disbelief. The result? The city issued Ron a citation for illegal tree removal, which carried a $5,000 fine per tree under our local law. We have a heritage tree ordinance, up to $5,000 fine for each tree removed without a permit. That's $10,000 total, and they further ordered him to plant new replacement trees of a certain size within 90 days or face additional fines. Ron was livid. Between the HOA and the city, he now had fines piling up. He appealed to the city to drop the penalty, claiming he was only clearing storm-damaged trees. Another lie. I provided the arborist's report to the city as evidence the trees were healthy before he cut them. His appeal went nowhere. Now he was on the hook for $10,000 to the city and a couple thousand to the HOA, and he hadn't even dealt with my lawsuit yet. I filed the lawsuit with my lawyer's help, seeking treble damages for the tree value plus costs. In total, we were asking for around $50,000, 3 times the tilde's $16,000 value, plus additional costs for yard restoration, attorney fees, and the emotional anguish of losing the trees. I know some Reddit folks might say that sounds high, but remember, the law explicitly lets me triple the damages for willful violation. And we had clear proof of willfulness, the HOA warning, and his own admission to me that he did it on purpose. I was determined to make him pay dearly for his bullying. Ron, being overconfident and used to winning through intimidation, decided to represent himself in court rather than hire a lawyer. He really believed this was a nuisance suit I'd drop. Big mistake. I had evidence galore. The arborist report, photos of the felled trees, the police report, the HOA letters, the city fines, and even a video from my security camera. Oh yeah, did I mention I had a trail cam in my yard? It's primarily there to catch raccoons, but it caught Ron in 4K resolution, marching onto my property with his chainsaw and cutting down my trees. When we submitted that footage as evidence, Ron's face went pale in the courtroom. In the end, it was an open and shut case. The judge was appalled at Ron's behavior. In addition to the raw damages, the judge cited the state law on trespass and tree cutting and awarded triple damages due to the malicious nature. Judgment for the plaintiff, me, to the tune of $45,000. Tree value tripled, plus some additional costs. Ron was practically foaming at the mouth when the verdict came down. He had the nerve to yell, "This is outrageous!" in the courtroom, which the judge did not appreciate. The judge sternly told him he was lucky not to be facing criminal trespass charges on top of this, and that he brought it on himself. Now, winning a judgment is one thing. Collecting is another. Ron refused to pay the $45,000. Of course he did. He stormed out and later sneered at me over the fence. "You'll never see a penny loser." I was prepared for that possibility. My lawyer informed me that with the court judgment, we could put a lien on Ron's property, since he owns his house. A judgment lien basically attaches to his house. If he ever sells or refinances, I get my money from the proceeds. Also, in our state, if he doesn't pay up within a certain period, I could even force a foreclosure sale in extreme cases. I wasn't necessarily wanting to go that far. My goal was mainly to make him suffer until he compensates me. Around this time, I learned why Ron was so desperate to clear eyesores like my trees. He had been planning to sell his house all along. A neighbor friend tipped me off that Ron had a realtor over before all this started. He never told anyone, but he was preparing to list the house for sale, perhaps to escape all the bridges he'd burned in the neighborhood. The theory is, Ron cut my trees because they slightly obscured the view of his house from the street, and drop leaves on his lawn, potentially turning off buyers. Basically, he wanted to pretty up his property for sale by stealing some of my yard's appeal, removing what he saw as messy trees, and likely planning to quietly extend his lawn into where my trees stood to make his lot appear larger to buyers. He was already blowing leaves into my yard to fake a bigger lawn, as I later found out, a trick some unscrupulous sellers do. Well, karma's AB asterisk, 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 as they say. Because of the lien I now placed on Ron's house, he couldn't sell it without paying me off. When he eventually listed the house, against the advice of presumably any sane realtor, the title search by the prospective buyer's attorney showed my hefty lien. Not to mention, any buyer would also see the unresolved city fines and the fact that the property was in violation of city ordinances. Since he hadn't replanted the trees as ordered, he ignored that too. No buyer in their right mind would touch his house until all those encumbrances were settled. Real Estate 101. You can't sell a house with a clouded title. Ron's house was legally unsellable, exactly as I planned. He tried to be sneaky. I'll give him that. Ron actually had the gall to remove the for sale sign and pretend he wasn't moving. Then he quietly approached me with a half-baked settlement offer. He'd pay me $5,000, a far cry from $45,000, if I agreed to release the lien so he could close a sale he had lined up. Apparently, he did find an interested buyer, but they wanted the lien gone. I told him no way. The judgment is $45,000. I'm not settling for a tiny fraction. He begged, he yelled, he threatened to make my life hell. I calmly responded that the lien will come off when he pays the full court-ordered amount, not a moment sooner. For once, the bully had no power. All his bluff and bluster couldn't get rid of that legal paperwork. He tried some dirty tricks, of course. He filed an appeal of the judgment to stall, which he lost. He then complained to the HOA that my remaining landscaping was now making his property look bad. Talk about irony. The HOA members laughed in his face. By now, everyone knew what he'd done. Ron even spread rumors to neighbors that I sued him over nothing, and I was greedy. I set the record straight by showing a few neighbors the video of him trespassing and chopping. Those who hadn't sided with me yet certainly did after seeing that. His reputation was toast. At this point, Ron had no friends left in the neighborhood. He was facing mounting pressure, couldn't sell his house, couldn't escape the debt, and every month that passed incurred interest on the judgment. Plus, the city was still on him about the unplanted replacement trees, adding daily fines now. From the day the court ruled, my lien ensured I'd eventually get paid, and in the meantime, he was stuck. The power dynamic had flipped. He couldn't bully his way out of this. I won't lie, I felt a grim satisfaction each time I saw that for sale listing for his house pop up online with pending lien holder approval on it. He relisted a couple of times, even dropped the price, but buyers kept balking once they dug into the disclosures. Word got around that his property was a legal mess. One realtor acquaintance told me the value of Ron's house plummeted because any new owner would be on the hook for the tree, replanting and dealing with me, the lien holder. Essentially, his idiocy slashed tens of thousands off his home's value. The irony is if he'd just left my trees alone, none of this would have happened. He might have sold and moved by now with full value. Instead, he's stuck. So that's how I legally nailed my bullying neighbor. He chopped down my trees to boost his property value, and in return, I made his property untouchable on the market. He wanted my trees gone to make a quick buck. Now he can't make a buck at all until he faces me. I stood up to the bully using the law, and I'm proud of it. It's not a tidy ending with high fives. It's messy and ongoing, and honestly, that's fine by me. I doubt he'll ever try to mess with me or anyone's trees again. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, Ron. Update 1, 6 months later. Hi again. I didn't expect to post an update, but things have escalated in unbelievable ways. It's been about 6 months since the lawsuit, and as you know, Ron's house still hasn't sold because of the lien and fines. Living next to an enemy in a stalemate is tense, to say the least. Here's what's happened since. After my original post, Ron's situation went from bad to worse. The city fined him even more for failing to plant the replacement trees they ordered. He completely ignored the 90-day deadline to replant, so the city started issuing additional fines, something like $100 per day past the deadline. It's been months, so do the math. Last I heard, he's racked up over $10,000 in new fines on top of the original $10,000. The city also placed its own lien on his house for the unpaid fines. So now there's my lien and the city's lien both encumbering his property. Ron essentially made his house a financial toxic waste site. Tension in the neighborhood grew too. Ron began openly feuding with the HOA. He flat out refused to pay the HOA fine or comply with their order to plant trees. He started dumping trash on the empty spots where my oaks once stood, technically on my property, as some kind of spiteful act. I caught him on camera tossing a bag of garbage over the fence onto the stump of one oak. I reported this harassment to the HOA and police. The HOA slapped him with yet another fine for failure to maintain neighborhood standards and littering. Of course, he didn't pay that either. It became clear that Ron was unraveling. He'd stand on his lawn glaring at me or any neighbor who passed by. A couple times I heard him shouting on the phone, presumably with his realtor or lawyer, in a very panicked tone about being stuck with this damn house. I almost felt a twinge of pity, almost, but then one night things got scary. Ron retaliated in a dangerous way. Late one evening, I was startled awake by a loud noise. I looked out from my bedroom and saw flames near the fence line. I ran outside to find my wooden fence and one of the old oak stumps on fire. I immediately grabbed a garden hose and called 999 emergency services. Luckily, I managed to damp it down, and the fire brigade arrived quickly to finish the job, preventing it from spreading to my house or the rest of the yard. The fence was charred and ruined in a section, and the old stump was a goner. I had a strong suspicion Ron was behind this arson. He had been out drinking on his porch earlier. I could smell it and hear his slurred yells at the football game on TV. He must have thought burning the remaining evidence of the trees would somehow help him, or just give him twisted satisfaction. The fire officer found indications that an accelerant, like lighter fluid, was used, and it started on my side of the fence near Ron's yard. Police questioned Ron, who of course claimed ignorance. "It's my neighbor's property, not mine. Maybe he did it himself for insurance," he reportedly said. Absolutely bonkers accusation. I showed the police my security footage, but frustratingly, the camera didn't clearly catch the moment of ignition. It had a blind spot. Still, it did show Ron lurking by the fence minutes before the fire started, and then him running back into his house once the flames grew. That was enough for police to arrest Ron on suspicion of arson and reckless endangerment. So yes, Ron was taken away in cuffs that night. It was surreal watching from my driveway as the once cocky bully was placed in a police cruiser, yelling that he was being framed. Several neighbors came outside to watch the spectacle. One of my neighbors whispered to me, "That guy is completely off the deep end. Good riddance." I felt shaken, but also relieved that law enforcement was finally intervening beyond civil matters. Over the next few days, a lot came to light. It turns out Ron was financially desperate. A neighbor, who is a bank manager, learned that Ron had taken a hefty home equity loan, presumably expecting to pay it off when he sold the house. But since he couldn't sell, he was stuck with that debt, plus all the fines and my judgment. He was drowning in debt and had defaulted on his mortgage payments to boot. So the bank was starting foreclosure proceedings against him. This guy managed to ruin his life in half a year. Massive legal judgment, city fines, HOA fines, and now a criminal arson case, and a likely foreclosure. All because he couldn't control his rage. Ron was released on bail after a couple days, and unbelievably, he returned home. I thought for sure he'd bail out somewhere else. But I guess it's hard to find a place to go when you're broke and everyone hates you. He slunk back into the neighborhood, looking ragged. You'd think he'd keep a low profile, but nope, Ron decided to escalate the crazy even further. One afternoon, I caught Ron on my property again, this time with a can of spray paint. He was spray painting something on the new wooden privacy screen I had put up to replace the burnt fence section. I stepped outside and yelled, and he ran off, dropping the spray can. On the fence, he had scrawled "liar" and some other incoherent profanity. I was just done with this nonsense. I called the police again, citing the ongoing harassment and the violation of the restraining order I had gotten after the arson incident. Oh yes, I made sure to get a restraining order. Ron was legally required to stay off my property, which obviously he violated. This time, the response was swift. The police arrested Ron for violating the restraining order and vandalism. Given his recent bail and pending charges, the judge was not lenient. Ron got locked up for a longer stay this time, at least until his arson hearing. Now, here's the unexpected twist. With Ron in jail and his house inching toward foreclosure, an opportunity emerged. One day I was approached by an attorney, representing Ron's mortgage lender. They explained that the bank was foreclosing on Ron's house due to non-payment. However, the bank knew about my lien and the city's lien, and these complicate the foreclosure. The attorney floated an idea. Would I be willing to negotiate on my lien? Essentially, if I agreed to a reduced settlement, the foreclosure sale could proceed more cleanly, and I'd get guaranteed money sooner rather than possibly nothing later, if the house auction didn't cover everything. I was initially skeptical. I smell a rat whenever bankers come knocking. But I also learned that the city was negotiating similarly. They just wanted the property compliance issues resolved and were willing to waive some fines for a new owner who'd plant trees. It hit me that if the bank foreclosed and auctioned Ron's house, there might not be enough to cover all debts. My lien is subordinate to the mortgage. The bank gets paid first, usually. If the sale price is low, and it would be given the situation, I might get little or nothing of my $45,000 judgment. That was a harsh realization. I had gotten sweet revenge, but there was a risk I might never see the full payout. After consulting with my lawyer, I decided to play ball, cautiously. We entered negotiations with the bank's attorneys. I also represented my own interest to the city to ensure they knew I wasn't the obstacle to resolving this. In the end, I agreed to reduce my lien to $30,000 if the house sold at or below a certain price, with a provision that I'd get the full $45,000 if it somehow sold higher. The city agreed to drop their lien entirely in exchange for the buyer committing to replant trees and fix the yard within a year. It wasn't ideal. I hated the idea of giving Ron even a slight break on the money, but practically, getting something was better than a gamble of getting nothing. And frankly, I wanted this chapter over. Fast forward a couple more months, Ron's house went to foreclosure auction. It sold to a real estate investor who snatched it up for a bargain, given all the damage and stigma. As expected, the sale price only covered the bank's loan and part of my lien. I got a check for around $30,000, which, while short of the full judgment, is still significant. The investor immediately had crews cleaning up the place, fixing the damage Ron caused, and interestingly, they planted not 2 but 4 new young trees, I guess to appease the city and be neighborly. Ron, as far as I know, is still dealing with his criminal cases. With his house gone and presumably underwater on debts, he's basically ruined. Last I heard at a neighborhood grapevine, he might plead guilty to the arson in exchange for a lesser sentence, but even then, he's looking at jail time. I don't expect to ever see him back here. Good riddance. I have mixed feelings about how it all ended. On one hand, I did get a measure of justice. Ron paid a steep price and can't hurt anyone here anymore. On the other hand, the situation got way more chaotic and darker than I anticipated. No one won cleanly here. I didn't get every dollar I sought, and I went through months of stress and drama. The neighborhood had to endure a psycho's meltdown, and we still have to live next to the aftermath. The house is under renovation by the new owner now. It's not the tidy revenge story I set out to write, but it's real. Actions have consequences, often messy ones. At least now, I can stand in my yard without fearing a hostile neighbor. I even planted 2 new oak saplings near where the old ones stood. They'll take decades to grow, but it's my way of healing the space. Every time I water them, I'm reminded that bullies can be stood up to, even if the fight is tough. And when I see the empty spot where Ron's for sale sign used to be, I can't help but smirk a little. His house was unsellable when it mattered most, and it ultimately cost him everything. Update 2. Final. A lot of you have been asking for a final update, so here it goes. And buckle up, because even I didn't expect these last turns. It's been another year since my last update. By now, Ron is long gone from the neighborhood, and a new family lives in his renovated former house. But the ripples of our war carried on for a while. After the foreclosure, I hoped things would quiet down. And they did, externally. However, I got subpoenaed to testify at Ron's arson trial. It took that long to come to trial. Despite all his financial ruin, Ron had decided to fight the arson charge in court rather than take a plea. I think it was a matter of pride or spite. Who knows? I had to recount the whole saga again on the stand, which was like ripping open old wounds. They showed my security footage to the jury, and other neighbors testified about his threats and bizarre behavior. It was emotionally exhausting to relive it, but I wanted to see it through to ensure he faced justice. In the end, Ron was convicted of a lesser charge. Not full arson, since the fire didn't damage an occupied dwelling, but criminal mischief and reckless endangerment. He got 18 months in county jail. He also had to pay me for the fence he burned. A minor restitution order, nothing compared to the civil judgment. When I heard the guilty verdict, I can't describe the relief. It felt like closing a very dark chapter. Ron, flanked by officers, actually turned to glare at me as he was led out of court, but I just stared back. There was nothing left he could do to me now. Life in the neighborhood improved a lot with him gone. The new neighbors who moved into Ron's old house are wonderful. Friendly, respectful folks who actually apologized to everyone for the state of the property when they bought it. They cleaned everything up and even held a little block barbecue to introduce themselves. At that barbecue, those of us who went through the tree saga, as they call it, swapped stories. It was strange being somewhat local famous for this. People still ask me, Hey, you're the guy with the tree revenge, right? It's a small town, so word had spread. Some even thanked me for standing up to Ron, because apparently he had harassed others who never held him accountable. Now you might think this is the part where I say, and I lived happily ever after. But remember, I promised no clean or happy endings, and there is one lingering aftermath. The whole ordeal changed me, and not entirely for the better. I won't lie. I still get anxious whenever I hear power tools in the neighborhood. The sound of a chainsaw in someone else's yard makes my heart race and my mind flash back to seeing those stumps. I installed extra cameras and even an alarm on my new fence line. My friends say I might have a bit of PTSD from the harassment and fire. Maybe I do. It's something I'm working through. Legally, everything is settled now. I used the $30,000. I got to do some property repairs and, yes, plant new trees. Financially, I'm fine, but I didn't recoup attorney fees or the full value of what I lost, so I'm a bit in the red from it all. Knowing what I know now, how ugly and drawn out it would get, would I do it again? Honestly, I'm not sure. I hate that a man essentially destroyed himself and dragged me through hell over 2 trees. Don't get me wrong. I'm not sad for Ron's fate. He earned it every step of the way, but I do wish it hadn't had to go this far. There's no glee in me about it anymore, just a sense of a necessary ordeal that happened.